There was actually a time when Muslims used to name their children Israel, because it's the noble name of a noble prophet who's mentioned in the Quran. But it's unthinkable that a Muslim would do that today, because our thinking has come to be dominated by a secular narrative. We need to think Muslim. We need to return to the narrative of the Quran, and that narrative is the truth about Palestine that nobody's talking about. And that's what this series is about. In this first video, I'm going to show you that there are 3 narratives for what is happening in Palestine. 3 different perspectives, 3 different worldviews. The first one is the dominant secular narrative. The second is the Jewish narrative. And the third is the Muslim narrative. I'm going to show you that if someone believes in the first narrative, the secular narrative, or the second narrative, the Jewish narrative, then they're going to divide people into groups that want to fight each other. But if someone believes in the Muslim narrative, the third narrative, then they'll bring everyone together into a single group. The Palestinians, the Jewish people, and everyone else becomes a single group that comes together in order to submit to God. And this group has equal access to God. It has equal access to the temple, regardless of its ethnicity, regardless of its race. The Muslim narrative that I'm going to describe in this series assumes that it's really easy to show that Islam is true. People don't realize how easy it is to show that Islam is true, that Allah exists and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger, no doubt whatsoever. I teach that in a course called Why Islam is True, through 4 rational arguments that are in the Quran that were used by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Unfortunately, they're not well known in our times. The first of these arguments is an argument that destroys every single atheist objection to belief in God. And you can learn that argument by watching a free video series called The Quranic Case for God. You can find the link in the description below. Let's return to the Muslim narrative and see how it unites the Muslims and the Jews. I'm going to show this to you using the name Israel. Muslims used to name their children Israel. The most authentic collection of prophetic traditions, hadiths, in Islam is a book called Sahih al-Bukhari. There are narrators in this book of hadith whose name is Israel. In Arabic we say Israel. But that doesn't happen anymore, because the dominant narrative of what's happening in the world today in the Muslim mind is the secular narrative. And so they associate the word Israel with a nation state instead of with a noble prophet. This secular narrative is what we find in the media. It divides people into different races, different ethnicities, the Palestinian people, the Jewish people. And then it talks about whether particular pieces of land belong to one ethnicity or to another ethnicity. In the context of this secular narrative, these 2 races, these 2 ethnicities, they fight with each other. They consider the other race to be their enemy, and they believe, based on this narrative, that if they adopt the culture, the heritage of their enemy, then they're being traitors to the cause of their own people. And this is how this dominant secular narrative, which is based on ethnicities, homelands, nation states, this is how it divides people into different groups that fight with each other, and it promotes a culture of conflict. It's this narrative that's in the media. It's this narrative that has shaped the modern world. And that's why everyone, even Muslims, they use this narrative when they're making political negotiations, to make peace, to make war, to make ceasefires, to send humanitarian aid. And so this narrative has come to dominate the Muslim psyche. And that's why they no longer name their children Israel. It'll make them traitors to the cause of Palestine. The Jewish narrative resembles the secular narrative because it views the state of Israel as an ethnic homeland, a nation state that belongs to the Jewish people. And because of that, just like the secular narrative, It divides people into groups and promotes a culture of conflict. But it goes one step further. It adds a religious element. It says that the Jewish people are the chosen people of God, that Jerusalem is the chosen city of God, and that the Dome of the Rock should be destroyed and replaced by a temple that is dedicated to God, and that the Jewish people should be the exclusive custodians of that temple, and that for other people, like the Palestinians, to walk around and worship in that temple is a desecration of the holiest place on earth. This religious element makes the Jewish narrative even more divisive, even more conflict-prone than the secular narrative. But the Muslim narrative doesn't do that. The Muslim narrative unites. It brings people together. It actually confirms the Jewish narrative. It confirms the narrative of the Jewish people, even if they oppress the Muslims. Let's take the name Israel. Why did Muslims used to name their children Israel? Because Israel is another name for the prophet Jacob. In Arabic and in Hebrew, the name Jacob is Yaqub. He had children, he had descendants. The descendants of the prophet Jacob are called the children of Israel. In Arabic, we say Bani Israel. In Hebrew, it's the same word, Bnei Yisrael. The Jewish people, the children of Israel, say that they're the chosen people of God. And the Muslim narrative confirms that. It's true. It's in the Quran. The Quran tells us that God favored and blessed the children of Israel, because for hundreds of years, every single prophet and messenger that God sent down to earth was from the children of Israel. Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, all of these are great prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, that are venerated in the Muslim narrative, and they're all from the children of Israel. And this was a tremendous favor from God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, God says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ اخْتَرْنَاهُمْ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ, which means that we surely chose them عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ, knowing full well everything that would happen, everything that they would do, we surely chose them over everyone else, عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. Wait a minute. According to the Muslim narrative and the Jewish narrative, Israel is the name of a noble prophet. According to the Muslim narrative and the Jewish narrative, the descendants of this noble prophet are called Bani Israel, Bnei Yisrael. According to the Muslim narrative and the Jewish narrative, these descendants were chosen by God. It looks like the Muslim narrative is just like the Jewish narrative. It is, but with one difference. It's not based on race. It's not based on ethnicity. It's not based on nation states. It says that human beings are all one people who come together in submission to God. They all have equal access to God. They all have equal access to the temple in Jerusalem. And they all have equal access to the temple in Mecca. Wait a minute, are these things temples? Yes, they are. Just like Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Join me in the next video and I'll show you why.